Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us, whether you're joining us live or whether you're watching this as a recording later on. A very warm welcome to you all. My name is David Olsson. I'm the Managing Director here at the Institute, and this is the first of a series of PMI-related discussions, not your kind of usual webinar where we try and sell you a clever framework, which is a shame because, as you all know, I quite like a clever framework. We want to try and make these sessions kind of genuinely intellectually curious. We want to try and make them engaging with you. We may not have the answer. We might just have an interesting conversation. And that's exactly the premise that Anne and I, my co-host Anne Kampf, got to when we first started discussing these a while ago. So hello, Anne, first of all.
Hello.
So one I've known for a while, and I think has done some really interesting thinking about the physics of people and about the personal and structural dynamics that exist. And when we think about that, it gets even more fascinating when we apply it to M&A and indeed the people side of M&A, which is the kind of the point of the conversation today. Also with us today, we have a couple of guests. Gabe from WTW and Abdul Malik from a wonderful business in Oman called Asyad. All three of you, if you can introduce yourselves, please. I believe, Gabe, you're first.
Sure. Thanks, David, and thank you all for joining. So, Gabe Langerak, I lead WTW's M&A consulting activity in the CEMEA region with a focus on the GCC. Previously did the same for our European team, so supported a lot of multinationals through due diligence, integration planning, and post-merger integration, as well as a lot of HR, M&A readiness trainings over the years, helping together with IMAA and separately organizations understand better where to put people when it comes to M&A and how to address people issues. So very pleased to be here.
Thank you. Abdul Malik, you're right in the thick of things, not only in the thick of things in Oman, but in the thick of things of a deal. Please tell us more. So next slide, please, Glenn. And we will ask Abdul Malik to unmute himself because the poor man can't hear us. So Divine, if you can back channel Abdul Malik, I shall introduce him to you all whilst he's able to hear us. So currently Abdul Malik is as you can see on the slide here, the group chief people officer at Asyad. Asyad are a multimodal business based in Oman, the state-owned logistics, ports, shipping, and also post business of Oman. They have a global reach, expanding across the Middle East. They have a global reach, having just completed a deal with a logistics tech business in the UK. So Abdul Malik is also currently acting as the integration director on that large and live deal. And once his tech is able to allow him to, he can tell us perhaps more about that as we go through the session. And Anne, finally.
Thank you, David. And thank you to IMAA, Gabe and Abdul Malik for accepting to be part of this joint adventure and for creating this space for sharing, learning, and growing together across the M&A community. I have a background in physics. I have an experience of over 22 years in oil and gas, but today I'm entirely in my personal capacity, driven by the strong belief that some of the most important conversation in M&A happen exactly where certainty starts to break down. I am very happy to be here and to continue the discussion with you, with Gabe and Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik, maybe now you can say a few words about you.
Not yet.
The moment the conversation becomes uncomfortable, the word people appears very quickly. People resistance, people issue, people misalignment, people not adapting. And sometimes those things are true, don't get me wrong, but sometimes people becomes the first or the final explanation for problems we no longer know how to structurally describe. So today the goal is for us to stay with that tension a little longer than usual and deep dive into the topic.
Okay, let's get going with our first question, perhaps, and we'll join as we go.
So before we begin, we'd like to see what the room itself and the audience associates with people problems in M&A. Not theories, not frameworks, as David mentioned at the beginning, just the words people have actually seen appear inside integration. Do people problems in M&A actually exist, or are they often governance failure wearing human faces? So kindly ask you to complete the sentence. The integration failed because people.
And we'll get your responses, and as we get those in, we'll start to blend those in as we go. So there's interesting words there, isn't it? Disengage would kind of assume that they may well have been engaged in the first place. Are resistant to change. It's always fascinating. I remember being in a training once, and people said, "Yeah, okay, but how do we actually get people to not be so resistant to change, like it's their fault, like we're somehow victim blaming?"
Yeah, most of these words describe behavior, right? Resistance, communication. Very few describe conditions, which may already tell us something. Culture. It's also interesting how quickly organizations personalize integration tension. But during our alignment call prior to this meeting, during our get to know us call, one thing we kept returning to was identity, role, stability, predictability, belonging, and whether people still recognize themselves inside the future organization.
There is something, isn't there, about the one sense of identity, just to kind of pick up on that if you work for a business, you work for a brand as well. And one can feel quite proud about that, what that business does, who it is that business serves. And are they proud? Can they stand behind the business they work for? I've worked with some wonderful companies in the past and have always been proud about saying where I work. And I think if that brand changes, what does that do to one's identity?
Yeah.
Interesting there. We're scared of the future. Absolutely. I mean, if you don't know what the future holds, it is likely you're going to feel some sense of perhaps excitement or some energy, whether that energy is excitement that can turn very quickly against you, or whether it is fear that you need to do something about. So there's some really interesting things coming through here. Should we bring in our guest, Anne?
Yes.
Gabe, you've looked at this from a consulting point of view, where you've had, I think, the great luxury almost of kind of being able to view this from many different company positions, big deals, small deals, corporate deals, private equity deals, Gulf region, European. You've kind of seen it all, really, haven't you? So
I laugh because I think you can never say that you've seen it all. There's
No.
so much that's there. Somebody once told me when you've seen one deal, you've seen one deal. Some people think that when you've seen one, you can then do all the others. It's like, well, not really, because they're all different.
Mm.
And they all have their own unique elements. But absolutely, there's loads of, and some of the stuff that was there, I recognize. I think a lot of it comes down to culture, communication, change management, that kind of stuff, which you can all plan for and you can all look at before you get into that. And so, I think when we looked at what are things that go wrong when you're talking about the people issues, it's the fact that we haven't planned for differences in culture. We've just sort of assumed, oh, well, we'll just put them together and sort of see what happens, or worse yet, no, our cultures are very similar. It's like, yeah, when you look at each other's websites, the terminology that you use might be roughly similar and the values and the missions. But culture really comes down to how you do things when it comes into the thick of things. And how you do things is very, very different from one organization to the next. Even if your values are the same, that doesn't mean that you're doing things in the same way. So, I think that practical aspect can be very tricky. And another element that very often comes into play here is clashes of leadership and management styles. Organizations come together. We were expecting one thing, something else happens, and the leaders can't align. The leaders are culturally misaligned or haven't been communicated to properly. And then what happens is that trickles down to the entire organization. And I've often had situations where the leadership hasn't been effective and has actually created, in the end, that created a toxic atmosphere because the way they were thinking about the transaction and the deal would show in their behavior, and it would show in the terminology that they would use towards their subordinates, towards the people that they were working with. And subsequently, those people were effectively poisoned against the transaction, and that's deadly, regardless of what you're trying. And I think that kind of thing is always terrible.
Gabe, at what point do you realize that what is called a people problem, it's not one?
So I would politely disagree, as you know, Anne. I think these are all people problems, and that's the whole point, is that very often the root is the people to some degree. But I do take your point that, the fundamental solution isn't to change the people, it's to change the way that we work with those people, and changing the systems and how we work with each other. So when we think about it's a people issue, usually what they mean is that what we're seeing is something related to people. And so the outcome is a people issue. However, that is what I would call a lagging indicator, right? It means that stuff has already happened before, which is causing you to see the problem manifest itself in your employees or in the people. And whether that is increased turnover, lower productivity, or disengagement, or whatever it could be, there are elements that have happened before that you could have seen, that you could have that could have allowed you predicted that you could have that could have stopped that from happening, and that I think is the biggest thing.
So the real shift happens when behavior stops looking irrational and starts then looking predictable given the environment.
I think so. I think when you start to understand why people are doing the things that they're doing, then you can start to attack the root problem. If you're simply looking at it from the perspective of patching up what is happening and trying to battle the symptoms instead of the root cause of the let's call it the disease, it's just going to continue happening. And so, you really have to get down to why that is happening. And I think 9 out of 10 times it's because of change management, lack of communication. I think we saw that in the comments earlier as well. A difference in culture, and it doesn't mean that, because I often hear, oh, difference in culture, but we can't change the culture. Well, but that's not what we mean. When we say difference in culture, it's about understanding the differences in each other's culture and working out, okay, well, if this is how you perceive things, and this is how I perceive things, or if this is how you do things, and this is how I do things, let me adjust the way that I work slightly to better fit. And I think, we talked about this before, and I think Abdul Malik used the analogy of a marriage, and I love that, because that's exactly it. If you're getting married, you're expecting to together work towards something new. You're not expecting the one person to completely and immediately throw their entire culture and way of thinking overboard and adopt yours. That's just not how it works. That's not how people work. And if you do expect that, then that often comes paired with resentment, and in the end, things like retention problems and things like that.
Yeah, it's very true. Abdul Malik, when we talked previously, one thing that struck me during our preparation discussion was how quickly you move towards listening and predictability. So I would like to ask you, in your experience, when people are described as difficult, what is actually happening?
Well, that's a very broad question, but I think commonly from experience, what happens, I think there is a pressure on expectation and delivery. So a deal is usually done, and there are certain assumptions part of the deal, certain assumptions of growth, certain assumption of results. And I think usually what happens with integrating to organizations, is that integration becomes a distraction to the business. And what happens there is that suddenly everyone's going to feel a little bit anxious that they need to deliver results. There are a bit GP targets that they need to focus on. And mostly what happens that's going to drive a behavior, Gabe did explain what would be the people start becoming irrational under pressure, and we start making decisions, and things like change management under pressure is not something that people like to hear, because change management sounds like a slow process, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take us away a couple of months, and we don't have time, and we need to deliver results. So what happens under pressure is that we fall into the trap of speed, and we forget that we are doing things fast, and we start losing sight over the damages that we are creating. And I think this goes back again, everything we've mentioned, the recipe is very clear. If you talk to any leader today, they will say, my first risk in an integration is culture. Yet the lowest amount of time spent is in culture. So that's, I think, is a balance that we need to think. And again, for me, maybe that's the reason, and I did mention this before, again, I have probably a bigger responsibility in the current integration that I'm leading, is they've chose the head of people to lead the integration, is maybe this is my role now, is to bring everyone back again to, to the place that they need to focus on, is culture. There's discussions has to be made. Let's come together and talk about our issues, and let's talk about our differences, but also we are working on a piece around culture. What is important, what is not, what is negotiable, what is not, what are these differences that we can overlook, and what are the things that we cannot overlook, and have a collective decision of how we want to manage the entity.
Oh.
I think that's it. Otherwise, you start kind of chasing around trying to find whose fault things are, and it can be useful. I don't know if it's very pleasant, an exercise to find the person who's to blame, because we are quite right from an intellectual point of view to say the structure's got to be right in the first place, right? We've got to put the required amount of thinking and planning pre-deal to understand these issues and put change management at the heart of everything we do, because that's the thing that solves all the other issues. You come back to your point, Gabe, we've got to find a compelling reason for change. It doesn't matter what the obstruction is, whether it's geographical, whether it's technological, whether it's cultural, all those things are, and so what? But if there's a compelling reason to climb the mountain, people will find a way. So one thing that humans are great at is finding a way. So we've got to make it compelling enough. Now, to blame a structure puts people to be blameless, but finding a person to blame can be quite challenging, especially when, we say, well, it's obviously the leader's fault. Okay, well, good luck with blaming the leader. And is that fair? Is that fair? How many deals have leaders led before? So I think there's again, I think we come back to, if there was advice given, it would be about thinking about it as early as possible and planning for it, and thinking, when people are under pressure, they do things that may well be out of character.
Right. And difficult behavior often looks very different once uncertainty enters the picture. And as you said, David, plans often assume rational adaptation. Reality, on the other hand, introduces identity, anxiety, history, incentive, and trust. So where is the gap largest between what was planned and how people actually behaved? From my point of view, HR or people and culture are strategic to integration. I would like to hear your opinion on that, Gabe and Abdul Malik.
So sorry, people and culture are strategic to integration. Absolutely. I think, what Abdul Malik was just saying earlier is that, very often it's said that yes, culture is really important, but no, we don't spend any time looking at it or actually spending as much time in due diligence or integration planning looking at it. And partly that's because a lot of people believe that you can't quantify or measure culture. And I think that's where there's a significant, there's still this belief that it is something completely fluffy and untangible. And actually, it isn't. There are multiple ways in which we can actually assess culture. And it's not, I think what we have to realize, it's not about identifying the right culture or the wrong culture. It's about identifying how, like I said before, how are you doing things? How are you perceiving things? And how is the other party doing things and perceiving things? One of the most effective ways of looking at that has usually been putting the leaders together of the two organizations that are coming together and getting them to do an analysis, a self-assessment of their own culture, and then asking them to do an assessment of the perceived culture of the other company. And then you map those two against each other. And that creates a conversation between those leaders and between those groups of leaders. Because the answer isn't this is right and this is wrong. The answer is, hey, I didn't realize that you thought we were this, whereas we thought you were that. And then suddenly you start to have a conversation about why people are perceiving each other the way they are and what the actual reality is between the two organizations. And that conversation then leads to acceptance and to understanding, which then trickles down to the entire organization.
Is there something in there, Gabe? And so I try to build on this, is that culture's not uniform. That there is we have to unpack the word culture, what it is not, what is it, what can we define it as to be useful in the context. But also, I think sometimes there is an assumption that culture is uniform throughout a business. A leader's view of what the culture of their business is may well be driven by their own ego rather than the harsh realities. And if you work in a very large business, you might have, play layers, echo chambers, places where there are quite marked differences of culture within any organization. Again, it's not easy, but we have to think about this stuff early, don't we?
And I think if I want to just add a comment around culture, and I think David did say that in general people don't understand what culture is. We understand strategy and planning because it's very clear process, outcomes, consequences are predictable. Culture is not. But in general, there are ways you can define culture, but things will impact your culture. Where you operate, which geography you operate will impact your culture, the industry you work in, whether you are, how people interact in an organization. Consultancy is more independent. In more collaborative organization, you need more collaboration, teamwork. Your market, your industry you're working on, if it's banking, is going to be highly regulated, so your change is very limited. But if it's tech, then it's going to be fast moving. You need to react with the market. All these elements will impact your culture. But I think the main thing is you need to understand. You need to know which culture you're in, and how much the acquirer is going to impact your culture. And what are these changes? And we need to make sure that we are monitoring these changes and monitoring how the organization reacts to these changes, so we can at least have a reaction to anything that happens in the organization because of culture change. But I would bet if you have a company that has existence in 5 or 6 geography around the globe, they probably each country will have this different culture.
And also, just to add to the complexity, you'll have different cultures with different business units. In your business, you've got post, logistics, ports, and I think we talked about this before, shipping. Really, there's a very marked difference between logistics and post, just in terms of the way the folks who work in those kind of business units think, what drives them, what their metrics are, what their general day-to-day behaviors are. The majority of those people could well be based in Oman. They could be Omani. They could work for Asia. They've got great pride in all of those things, but different. And so you're right. It does need to be a lot of drilling down in there.
I think we have a raised hand, David.
Yes, I was going to say, we said we would be engaging. Well, let's live by that. Tyrone, you have a question.
We can't hear you yet.
Technicalities of muting, that's the challenge.
Sorry about that. I was on the screen where I raised my hand and I couldn't get back to the screen where I was on mute. I had a question to you. Why is it that you think that money is often prioritized over people? I think there's some interesting things to unpack around that as well, if I may, because I think that's kind of what we're saying here. And I'm just wondering, why is that? Is it because people are better able to take care of themselves? Is it because the finance team are often in the driver's seat? What are the thoughts around that?
Just blame the accountants.
I think there's something about, if people are a business, but people are a business is full of people. People are at the heart of everything. If we wish to change a business, people are at the heart of that. People are rarely the overriding why for one business is going to buy another. I'm going to buy another business because I'm the better owner or operator of that of that business? Does the value that I can create justify the price paid? So that is in the very bones of why we do M&A. You can't just do M&A and it costs you money, because you'll very quickly find yourself out of a job and your business will be bankrupt. So there is a financial underlying monetary why.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm not suggesting that is more important than people, but it's certainly in the kind of linear thinking. That's a bit that will come very close first or second. There will be a strategy, but the numbers have to add up. You know, it's all very well having a strategy. If the numbers don't add up, forget it. So that is almost the overriding why we're going to do this deal and why we're going to make the changes we are. However, to enable the realization of the deal or the changes, we're probably going to have to look at people. If that's one answer, others will have other answers.
I think, David, just to build on what you've just said, I think that's exactly where it often falls down, which is the realization of those financials requires your people. And yet, to the point that Tyrone was making, you know, very often people are not necessarily front and center of the equation. You know, I think one of the things that I found several times, you know, deals are focused on the numbers, and they're focused on the numbers because it's nice, it's easy, and it's easy to measure. Like Abdul Malik said earlier about, you know, strategy and that kind of stuff, right? It's predictable. People are not predictable. So on day 100, we have a view of what the value is of the new combined firm. We do not have a view on what the new people value is, or whatever that might be. And part of the core problem, but this is maybe, you know, preaching to my own parakeet here, is that the business development teams do not get remunerated on future deal success. They get remunerated on closing the deal, potentially at the right price or whatever the KPI is, but they get remunerated on closing the deal, and not on whether that deal in the future is going to work from a people perspective. And so, you know, I think that's something I asked somebody once, you know, I flagged that was a potential challenge, and they said, yeah, but if business developers do bad deals and then they're going to be out of a job pretty soon, and so I agree. If you can flag that they should have known, and very often then at that stage we get that answer of, oh no, it was the people. Because that is of course the one variable that they cannot manage. They can manage the financials. They can't say, yes, we forgot a zero in one of our financial reports, you know, or we made an assumption that was wrong. But they can say, oh no, it was the people. Didn't work.
Yeah, but I think also, I think also is we probably need to define what people is. You did say in the beginning that yes, it's all people issue. When we say people, is, you know, at the end of the day, the owners are people, the management are people, the employees are people. So at the end of the day, yes, it's a people issue. And you know, an organization buys another organization, and the management of the, you know, acquirer should have the capability of creating value from the company that they've acquired, and they need to make it happen. If they are not adding, there's no growth. If there's no additional value, then basically you have the wrong people managing this whole thing. And we go back again to deal making, and David will probably make a comment here. Integration in general, the best practices starts from day one, when you start identifying targets. But that in reality does not happen. In reality, is everything is kept in a closed door with people who are looking at investment from a financial point of view, and they never look at integration complexity, people issues. That is gonna probably happen once the deal is made, and then they're gonna bring someone like me and say, you know what, manage this whole thing. So I think there is an element of when the integration starts, there's an element of the what is important, because very clearly I'm telling you, every consultant is going to tell you one of the top 5 risks is culture, is people retention, and even customer retention is linked to people.
Yeah.
So
I think you're right.
So it's very clear and glaring, yet we miss it out.
Yeah, totally. And I think you're right. The ideal will be to say, whilst you are strategizing about what company you may or may not buy and why, think about the integration at that point. And that's the ideal. And people don't do that because there is a kind of pragmatic, I don't need to do it now. There isn't a deal coming up now. Why am I taking away resource from that? It seems like the wrong place to invest in at the moment. And then when a deal moves out of theory land and goes into a place of, well, there is a deal on the table here, then it becomes very tight. Then we have to get, people kind of controlled around that. So you can't explore it then. Then there'll be an argument to say, well, we can't do it during due diligence because everyone's busy. And then there's deal structuring and last minute negotiation. There's always a reason not to do this. And I wonder whether those are lazy. let's just throw a word out there. It is in the end, they're very good reasons, but only until after the deal do you realize, I wish we could have stepped back in time and done that sooner. I wish I'd have put more money in my pension when I was 20 and not spending it. And it comes to a point where this stuff gets really important, but we're making trade-offs after the event. It's too late.
Yeah. I think it's also, this transition from acquirer of a business to owner of a business. And if this transition and pass from one to the other is not done carefully, then the gap appears. I'd like to ask Gabe. You spoke earlier about leading indicators versus lagging indicators. When does alignment fail quietly before anyone names it? And we talked about it a bit, but maybe you can deep dive in it.
When does alignment fail? So I think, for me, when you start looking at leading and lagging indicators, it's exactly as you were saying, David. If you start too late, then you're basically you're chasing after the fact, right? So you're just looking at those lagging indicators and trying to fix what hasn't been done previously. And so it really is about identifying early on, probably already in due diligence, possibly earlier, why are you doing the deal? What is the purpose of the deal? What are you trying to achieve with this transaction? Because that will tell you what your KPIs are. And once you know what your KPIs are, you can then start working backwards and saying, all right, well, if those are my KPIs, then what are the people risks to those KPIs? And you can start looking at leading indicators like, is there a lot of overtime happening within a particular group or business or team? Is there a lot of sickness or a lot of absenteeism or a lack of productivity in general, right? Those are things which might already be viewed earlier than retention. Other things which I think a lot of advanced organizations do is listening strategies, pulse surveys, champion networks, just making sure they're keeping an ear on the ground to employees to also be seen to be listening. I think sometimes that's half the battle won. Of course, then if something comes out of that, you've got action on it, because otherwise people are no longer going to share their thoughts. But I think those are the most important ones, and those are the things that you can actually achieve even in the first couple of days, so that you can move in tandem with the financial team and start to identify where possible issues and risks start to occur.
Yeah, by the time misalignment becomes visible, the system has usually been signaling it, right? Quietly
Exactly. Yeah.
for a time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people have a. I think people know when they're not aligned, don't they? You know, that there's probably a lot of nodding that goes on in the first few days. Do we all understand why this deal's taking place? Yes, but inside they might be thinking, I'm not absolutely sure, actually, but I don't quite want to ask at a town hall. And it's all very well a leader standing up in front of 500 people and saying, any questions, anyone? No questions. Great. They must all be very happy then. No. Those two things there's a misconflation there. And so I think it is about that, having that network of change agents, champions, whatever label you want to give these poor people. But you've got to find a way of getting right down to the roots of the business and understanding, are you okay with this? Whether it's pulse surveys, whether it's people talking to people, whatever the culture of the business is, there's something in there, isn't there, about, really being able to get your finger on the pulse and being able to act upon that, because otherwise you will turn into someone who sounds a little bit like a politician that says, I'm here to listen, I'm going to make changes, and then they don't. Then your trust is gone, isn't it? And so there must be something about that.
Yeah, people react less to presentation and more to signals, to listening, to communication, genuine communication. Yeah. Abdul, Malik, where do you feel tension first under pressure, in decision making, ownership, or communication?
Tension under pressure, I think probably is decision making. I think so. In general, if we want to paint this scenario, you're having a new baby now. I'm just moved in from marriage to new baby, so they've already having. So in general, a new baby, a company you've just acquired, there are ways where organizations deal with these entities. In general, I think the intuition is to be delicate and careful. So you don't want to disrupt, you don't want to make big changes. So you're handling them like a vase, and that's gonna be, it's very delicate. And I think this is where probably some organizations make mistakes, is that there are decisions that needs to be made, and you start hesitating on one side, but also in some other side, if things are going wrong, you start panicking and making the wrong decision. So I think there is a balance that you need to work with in an organization like this. You need to be very objective. You need to understand your data. You need to understand the organization. You need to be. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So you need to be thoughtful in your decision-making process. You should not be making decisions under pressure. You should not be not making decisions because you're afraid that you're going to break this vase. So there is that balance, is that you need to be making thoughtful decisions based on data, on indicators, and you need to have your finger on the pulse of the organization.
And I think, Abdul, Malik, sorry, if I can react to that, one of the things there comes back to what David was saying earlier, which is, if you're doing your integration planning right, you've already decided a bunch of this stuff beforehand.
Yes.
And so you don't need to be careful because you've managed the communications well around it. You've set the expectations around it, etc. I mean, there's often the question of should we integrate now or later? And that isn't it's a bit of a, well, what are you trying to achieve? And just be aware that if you're going to integrate later, that's fine. In some cases, that's absolutely acceptable. But just be aware that you'll have lost the burning platform for change, because the acquisition is the burning platform for change. After a couple of months, that has disappeared. And people are going to start asking, if you then make a change, people are going to start asking, why? What is different now compared to a couple of months ago? Why do you now suddenly want to change that? And so you've got to have a really good reason. And a good reason could be that, you know what, we're not doing this now because we've got other stuff going on first, and then we'll deal with that. That's absolutely valid, but it needs to be communicated well. And that requires planning. And that requires, back to David's point, early inclusion and integration or harmonization planning.
And there's something about tensions. There's something about tensions during those planning workshops, right? If one plans in isolation, then optimism is the value of it that sits behind the plan. It'll be fine because I'm clever and I've thought through the plan, not what if. That we can all get sucked into moments of of groupthink, and it'll be fine. It'll be okay. Well, actually, it won't be okay, because the surprise is, David, you were surprised. Should have thought about this before. This ain't your first rodeo, right? So you're right. It is that, and it's throwing in, having someone in those workshops throw in a bit of a curveball and say, right, what if on day 2 the staff just hurl their hands in the air and say, I've had enough. And so I think it's working through that. So you have planned it. I came to a fork in the road. I took one. I didn't stand there for half a day yapping about which way I might go. So there is the thoughtfulness, but there's the pre-planning thoughtfulness, and then the conviction of action when you need to act. But it is always that kind of pragmatic balance, isn't it? It's an absolute kind of balancing act all the way through, and you won't get all the decisions right, and that's okay.
Yeah. And you may face resistance, and we discussed it that people or employees first experience uncertainty personally and not strategically. So when behavior is described as resistance, what it is usually a response to?
Change. And I think one of the things that we always see with people is people want stability. They generally crave stability or dependability. And they, as soon as you start changing things and things start to become less stable, less certain, the first thing people are going to try and find are, what are the things that I am certain about? And I think one of the most fascinating things I always find about deals is that organizations communicate a lot about the reason for the transaction and the wonderful opportunities that's going to give to the stakeholders and the added value to all these, super wealthy people, which is wonderful. And quite frankly, as an employee, I couldn't care less. I want to know what's happening to me. I want to know what's happening to my job, to my team, and so unless you start to communicate about what this change is going to mean to me, I stop listening, because it's not relevant. I focus on the change and the impact that it's going to have on me.
I think there's something else in there as well, that yes, and there's even if one understands the reason for the change, you can quite rightly assume that your job is going to be, there's going to be an added layer to your job. If you're involved in being changed or leading change or being part of the change, or your sales team is going to take on half of their sales team, you might think, oh, I get it really, but I'm tired. I've been at this game a long time. I just want to go home to my family. I can't be doing with being excited about, a whole new team of people. So you're right. Even if you understand the reason for the deal, how do you get people motivated? Take that first step. And I think, how do we keep them motivated? There is a fatigue that comes with change, isn't there?
Yeah.
Enough with the t-shirts and the balloons. Just how are we actually going to keep people going through? And so I think that's another challenge. I've got some ideas on that, but love to hear other people's thoughts too.
Let's hear your ideas, I think, David.
That's always a good one. I think there's something about kind of leadership, right, that has to sustain it. It is a change plan that isn't just bells and whistles on the first day. It's a sustainable change plan that is tied to a project plan that is sympathetic to the amount of change that people can have inflicted upon them across a period of time. I've got a great friend who's I think her favorite phrase is "get real, David." Get your head out the clouds, get real. And there is a little bit get real about planning to curb a human's natural state of optimism. I've got a great plan because it's going to get there in kind of 6 months. Well done, David. Actually, get real. And then how can leaders play their part in the sustainability of that change? I think that comes down to governance as well. At what point do leaders get bored, or rather have to focus their attention somewhere else? So ensuring strong governance all the way through the lifetime of the project, ensuring focus on a proper comms plan that is an output of a change management plan, that's an output of a project plan that's been well thought through in the first place. There's lots to it. So actually quite a broad answer there, but it's complicated, it's difficult, but I think we have to understand that people need to have the strength and the long-term energy to keep that change moving forwards, and that's not easy.
Yeah, and resistance.
Sorry, go ahead, Anne. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that resistance sometimes is less about unwillingness and more about unresolved contradiction or uncertainty.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there is also the question, I think, of maybe it's a cliche, but what's in it for me?
Yeah.
Again, Gabe said, nobody cares about the shareholder value. People buying companies, they're gonna gain, a big amount of money. As an employee sitting in this organization, I could care less if it does not impact my role. But at the same time, if there's going to be tremendous amount of change around me, then what's in it for me? So
I think one of the things which I've found usually helps is to start identifying what drives specific groups of people, right? So your research and development department is going to have a different type of person that's differently motivated and differently engaged to your sales force. And so, let's say you're acquiring another R&D organization or the R&D department of another organization, trying to engage with your group and showing the possibilities that they now have and the future growth that they can have and the new cool things they can do with the new technology that you've just acquired, right? That might naturally be more interesting to these people than if you start talking about whatever else the initiative has there. Similarly with a sales group, actually focusing on the expanded clientele or the new products that they can bring to their clients or whatever it is, right? So I think it requires more tailored communication, which is what is really at the heart of this. Is we're used to sort of trying to create something generic for everybody that will solve all ills, and actually the reality is that, especially in the present day, perhaps that doesn't help anymore. That doesn't work anymore. We need people are used to more tailored, more direct information for me. And especially, I mean, right now, if you go on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is, LinkedIn, the messages you get are tailored to you because it has learned from your previous search terms and whatnots. And so you engage more because it is tailored to you. Whereas, previously in things like that, you wouldn't have. If it had just spouted literally everything that was going on at you, you would have ignored it.
And that does come down to, again, something about kind of geographical culture as well. I think the further west you go, the more you could, I'm not going to step into any lazy kind of stereotyping here, but there is something about more me, and therefore a requirement for more tailored. What was the phrase asked, or a question asked? Not what you can, just your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I'm sure it's in the wrong context. I've just made an awful mess of that. But that I think there is a risk that in certain Western societies, it's a little bit of me first. Not judging that at all. In other societies, perhaps there is a company culture, country. So there is a difference there. Is there a sense of some countries being more, dare I say it, subservient than others in just the natural way of things? So again, if we're doing cross-border deals, you've also got how do you get people to change? Well, the answer could be different country from country. The answer in one country could be just tell them and they will change. You don't have to herd any cats around here, my friend. Leave that to your Western societies. That I think that there could be something in there also.
And I just as an example, and I think I came across countries where you create a retention scheme and you give it to a certain leader. They would reject the retention scheme if it's not given to the whole team. And that's interesting, it's either us all or none. So you're right, country to country they might differ. You need to understand the culture of that country, how people, what's motivate them, the social relationships. There are things that probably you don't need. You need to spend enough time analyzing how organizations are, as Gabe said, how people are motivated and what exactly motivates them, how they work. So there are a heap of things that you need to really put time and effort in and analyze so you can make some informed, thoughtful decisions.
I think there's something about just even before you're planning an integration, designing an integration or anything, if you are the integration lead and you know that your company is going to be buying business in, pick a country, Brazil, UK, Saudi. If you know this is going to happen, get on the ground. Just get on the ground. Go to another company. Just understand what makes people from that country tick, because it's going to be different, isn't it? And I think that there's a real value in that. I was once asked, how can I understand how data centers work in Brazil? And I think they were expecting a very kind of clever answer. And I said, get on a plane, go to Brazil, and just understand how it all works there, because it'll probably be very different from wherever you're from. So that I think there's something about just having, you're right, it's learning those little nuances, because it's those little things that you wouldn't have thought of that will blow up a plan. And if that task that those people who've become exceptionally militant or resistant to change could be on a critical path, then, and you hadn't thought about it, then again, I come back to my point that my boss said to me years ago, the surprise is, David, that you're surprised. And so you have to think, what could go wrong, which is different from being the optimistic planner, isn't it?
Right.
Sorry, Anne.
No, please go ahead.
I just wanted to touch into what David was just saying. We just recently done a piece where we've helped the business development team understand better how a particular country works because of exactly that. And I think it's also around being careful, not just around culture and that kind of thing, but being careful to make the wrong assumptions. In their business plan, this was a UAE company buying, working and buying potentially into the US. And in the UAE, turnover is very limited. Their overtime would have been, pretty high, but it was anticipated, and people would do it because they were here anyway, and they would live on site, and so why would they think anything differently? Whereas, of course, in the US, turnover is much, much higher. And actually, in the US, people are allowed to reject overtime, and they will, because they'll say, actually, we want to, I want to preserve my work-life balance. No, I don't want to overtime. Thank you very much. And if we'd not had that session with them, their assumptions in their business plan would have assumed that this was perfectly normal, and that the UAE model was how they would run their US business, which I mean, anybody can see that would have been the wrong thing, but it's even down to such granular detail, and that's partly culture, it's partly country, and there's lots of those types of little examples across everywhere.
Agreed.
Me too. Dave, David, I think we have
Yes.
a second question for the audience.
We do, just to keep the audience not just enthralled by our meandering conversation, but engaged as well. So this goes back to what we were saying before, wasn't it? Do people problems in M&A actually exist, or are they often governance failures wearing human faces? Now, it does talk to a little bit to what we were saying earlier. Give us your answers, please.
Yeah. Everything is easy when the acquirers have time, or when the companies do have time, but usually there's pressure. All sorts of pressures, and I think that's a very, very important distinction, because under pressure, behavior becomes adaptation rather than preference or option.
And there's something,
yeah,
you said beforehand about how many choices do people actually have, and what is the how is the leadership on that? How vocal are they? When does a leadership suggestion become a command? Is there something very English about, I suggest you have a look again at that, which is an English way of saying that's awful, try again. And so
whereas I'm Dutch, David, and I heard, oh, have a look at that if you like, but don't worry about it too much, right?
Exactly.
But that's exactly it. Yeah.
So when does behavior stop feeling like a choice, actually?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? Yeah. When does behavior stop looking like a choice, signaling like a choice? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the easy answer is when it's rammed down your throat, right? So but translating that into transactions, you can create guidelines for leaders and for people in transactions, or you can create very rigid structures. And I think that is, again, dependent on the purpose of your transaction. But if you provide guidelines and you're allowing people some leeway, that can help. At the same time, you've then got to accept that there could be decisions or behaviors that are slightly different to what you were hoping or thinking you were going to achieve. In if everything is defined from the top down, and this is how you shall, the thou shalt model, then there is no choice, clearly.
Just to bring it to cultural languages, there is if you are a business that is more of an entrepreneurial business, and the decision making is been, I'm not going to say outsourced, but certainly federated, and you encourage people to make decisions on their own within guidelines. If you're buying a business that's very much consensus driven, where people they just wouldn't make a decision at all by themselves unless they had the consensus of colleagues. Actually, even the process of making a decision, whether it's right or wrong at the end, is another matter. Those two things are different as well. So, to come back to your point, Gabe, you can assess culture. It's not something intangible. It's how you look at it and how you decide what it is the start of the conversation. And then say, well, if we agree it is across these 7 or 8 different metrics, how are we going to find that out? Because asking a question whether it's a good culture or a bad culture, you may as well stay silent, because that's a pointless question, isn't it? But understanding, are you caring? Are you competitive? Actually, that's a much more nuanced question where you can actually find out some proper answers to that, and then you can say, okay, now I know how that business makes a decision. How is that going to be impacted within the execution of a plan when things start to fly around? And that's a challenge. Now that requires a lot of thinking, and so if you advertise that here are all the things we need to think about, back to your point right at the start, Abdul, Malik, all these things sit in the cultural bucket, don't they? But people don't focus any time on that because they've got to look at tech and due diligence and so on and so on. There is an unconscious trade-off made about it, and I think some people find my kind of final point is that some people will dismiss what they don't understand. Oh, we can leave that. Stop over engineering it, David. We can leave that till later. That's a people problem. That's not my problem, And again, I come back to my point earlier. I think the word was lazy, wasn't it? Because they dismiss what they don't understand, and therefore it doesn't get done, and it's not my fault.
And I think we go back again with all this down to clarity. Clarity, transparency. So going back to Anna's point around when do behavior becomes a choice or not a choice, I think if the organization, there's a clear understanding of how the organization makes decisions, then people will know what needs to be done and what not what decision do I make. A simple MOA can fix some of these issues, and you have clarity around who can make what decisions. But again, back to clarity, how this whole system works. And let's not underestimate the heap of issues sometimes we don't see. We see the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much underneath that we are avoiding. There's always an overestimate of the acquirer capability of managing a company. There is always the acquiring company you just bought. When you buy it, you haven't seen under the hood truly. So you're buying, you see only the surface. You buy the company, then you start seeing everything that you haven't, which is under the hood, with the cylinders, the shafts, and the problems, the leakages, and all the the things that are secret. Suddenly they are not, and you can see everything. So there are the whole system. I think the mindset should be things will happen. And back to what Gabe said, plan for the worst. Be careful around your risk. There are unknown risks. Prepare your options. Listen to the organization. Be proactive when you make decisions. Have a proper, critical things that you need to put in place. If structure needs to be changed, change it. If MOA needs to be put in place it. If governance needs to change it, and communicate properly to the organization how these things will work. And I still say again, we overlook and we underestimate change management, and it's always looked at as, for God's sake, this is going to slow down everything. And it's something leaders need to change. Change management is part of the business, and you have to do it if you want to protect the organization. Otherwise, just break everything and make your decisions and bear the consequences.
I think it's quite often seen as a separate work stream, isn't it? That's the issue. I think, you know, if someone from change management walks into a room. It sounds like the start of a poor joke, this, doesn't it? But and says, "Hello, I'm here from change management. How can I help?" Well, I think that in of itself is probably the error. That, you know, the change management needs to be in the very bones of how we're going to design the integration in the first place. Is there a compelling reason for change? Do we have a clear vision of the future? Do we have a credible plan to get there? I think those are the, you know, having all of those things in the very heart of what we're trying to do is equally important too. So one of the questions we did have an answer. We did kind of pose a question a while ago, and then quite rightly failed to listen to any of our audience at all. So the answer is that employees are often blamed for resistance, but in many failed integration, the real issue is that the organization itself, and I'm going to assume that this answer meant the acquiring organization itself, was never coherently integrated itself. So I think what they're saying is that, you know, it didn't really work because there wasn't a home for the acquired company's employees to go to. You know, how were they going to fit into a business that wasn't integrated itself? I think that may have been the added complexity.
Yeah, that there's a structure problem.
I think the other angle you could look at in that case is, you know, if the organization, if you have a regular acquisition and the systems and the operating model and the organizational design and sort of everything isn't integrated, then expecting the employees to embrace the new integrated organization is also hard, right? If I still sit in the same office with the same people, working behind the same laptop, talking to the same clients, yet you now expect me to be company X instead of company Y, well, that is harder than if there's some other elements which have forced me to start to think about myself as company Y. And that comes back to your beginning point, David and Anne, where you were talking about the identity, right? And how people identify with companies. If you've not changed any of the parameters or the ecosystem around me, then why should I identify myself with this new thing? And I come from an organization that is acquired and been acquired over the years, and I've gone through 3 or 4 of the name changes, if you like. And I think one of the most successful was where the organization came together, and it was 2 very similar organizations, and the people from the different businesses came together, and we all sat together. And what our leadership, or the leadership in my team, did at that stage was all of the projects that we did in any given period or year, they started pairing more junior and more senior people from the different organizations, so that you were no longer constantly working with the same people you were working with before. It was a forced, top-down, forced integration, but it worked really, really well because we all had the same mindset, and because in the end we were doing the same thing. And actually it helped us learn a lot more about each other's tools, technologies, methods of working, et cetera, than any amount of training or communication could ever have done. So that's
a big investment. that's a big investment, isn't it? All those things, the changes to the operating model, which is in other speakers is what can happen with you, would have involved a lot of change, a lot of investment in time and money and people to help you through that change, and also a why. There must have been a very coherent why. Change management is only going to be as good as the compelling reason. If the reason's not compelling, you can't dress it up any other way. It ain't actually compelling. Why are we changing finance systems, David? Is it going to add any value? Yes, no. If no, then I'm not going to do it. Is it because you have a policy that you want to get control of the acquired businesses? Yes. Okay. That's a reason. It's less comfortable, and it's still a fair reason. If you can't answer either of those two questions, arguably you shouldn't be changing at all, because it's going to be difficult to get that through. Monica, you have a question?
Yes, I do. So some of the topics that were discussed are, to a degree, hygiene factors at different levels of maturity in an integration from a people perspective. Going back to retention and people follow people more than follow organizations. How do you build loyalty?
Good question. So I'm going to take the first half of that and not talk about how we retain people. I think there should be, what does the operating model of the combined business need to look like to achieve the level of control required and or the business benefits and objectives? It's a very long sentence, that. But part of that operating model is, who are the people we need to do the tasks? And that could just well be business as usual tasks. That's going to take a long time, right? You can't plan all of that from an integration point of view. You can start to waterfall that after the deal's been done. Let the finance team guys understand who it is that they need to have within their teams. If it's not changing, it's not changing. Because you may well identify some people, and this is going to answer your question, hopefully, that you absolutely want to keep, and therefore, to Gabe's point earlier, what are their personal buttons you need to press to keep them there? What is it that enables loyalty within that person? And that's going to come down to a person, country, company, age matrix. But you may well identify that you don't want to keep them, in which case you haven't got a problem with kind of loyalty at all. That's a simple answer. Others will have other answers, hopefully.
Gabe, I'm not going before you.
Fair enough. So, Monica, I liked what you said, which is people follow people. I think very often that is very true. It does depend on very much on the industry. But for example, for companies that are acquiring startups or things like that, where there's a very big culture of, this is the owner, the CEO, I joined the business because of that person or whatever it is. We've seen that often. And then you acquire that business as a large multinational or a larger organization. You're acquiring the smaller organization. And now this CEO owner is suddenly becoming a mid-level manager effectively because of the change in size, which of course is not ideal for them to be retained. They leave because they've just had a pot of money because of whatever. And so now you've got a bunch of people who no longer have the leader that they were looking up to. So that is very, very hard. And that is a very hard sell usually. And I don't think there is a clear answer for that one. But I think one of the things I was thinking as David was talking, and as I was sort of thinking this through, I think trust is a really big part of building loyalty. And I think we've covered a lot of this, which is, listening to the people, making sure that they feel listened to, and that they that they trust that what you are saying is true, that what you have said is what you're going to do. And that means starting with small steps, right? It doesn't mean boiling the ocean. It means telling them what you're going to say tomorrow and then making sure that you say that thing tomorrow. It means giving them something that you're going to do in a week's time and making sure you've done it in that week's time. Because if they can trust that what you've said that you're going to do, you are actually going to do, then I think you will end up with a group of people that will at least be able to trust you and therefore be more loyal to you. Now, there are various other elements to that, of course, but I mean, that was the one that I thought of immediately, and that there's various other elements to think through in some of these cases. Yeah.
I would. Sorry.
Go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
I would add to what was said that also respect for the competence and leadership behavior that stays credible under pressure would also help to build loyalty. Abdul, Malik,
yeah, I think from my side, probably I agree with you, Anne. I think leadership behavior is important. If we're gonna have the organization ego, that we are more important than the people that are with us, and people will not leave. There are some organizations actually that have a thinking like that. So my view is that you need to have a compelling purpose as an organization that people buy into. You have the right leadership model, behavior that people respect and like to follow. You have the right employee value proposition for people. And if you do have, and I feel as an employee that I'm respected, and there is care in my, me personally and my career in an organization, I would probably want to stay in that organization. If these elements are not there, then question is, why would I stay?
I think Abdul, Malik, sorry, one of the things you said there which really resonated, I think that whole employee value proposition. Yeah. And then the question is, how does that match with my own personal values? And so in the end, and maybe this is why we're finding it so hard to answer, I think in the end, you're unlikely to be able to be everything for every person. And so, you've got to work out what you as an organization stand for. What are the values that you as an organization stand for? And therefore, what are the types of people that you as an organization want to retain? What values do those people have? Because if the values of the employees don't match the values of the company in the end, then chances are is that they're not going to stay long term, regardless of how much money you throw at them or what you do with them.
100%. We've got only a minute or so left. I think this is we said at the start of this webinar, and we will say it again with the next webinars that Anne and I will be hosting. We're not here to give people answers with this. This is not a well done us for giving the answers. It's about having the conversation. I think if there were to be an answer, it's difficult to find, and the more the people are required to stay with the acquired business, if it's important enough, you'll find a way.
Yeah.
You will invest time in them. You will give them whatever it takes, whether it's their own home and don't actually integrate them fully at all, or enough cash, or whatever it is it needs to be to press their buttons. If they are important enough to you, you'll keep them. If they're not important enough to you, they will go. And that is a conscious decision whether you like it or not. The surprise is your surprise, David. Anne, do you have any final words? I don't want to have the last word. That's not fair.
Yes, you closed with sort of an answer. I would like to be more provocative and say maybe the question is not why do people resist, but what exactly are people being asked to absorb? think about it.
Good point. Good point. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to Gabe. Thank you to Abdul, Malik. Thank you to all of you that have stayed throughout this live version. And thank you indeed to everyone else who is watching this on a recording on demand, either now or in the future. We've got a couple of slides just to close with. Glenn, if you can put those on. We have some upcoming events. So there are the rest of the series that both myself and Anne will be hosting. Stay tuned to LinkedIn and so on about that. There's one in technology, we've got one in integration strategy, and the final one's going to be in value creation. Some fantastic and interesting guests on there as well. We've got the Applied AI series, we've got the Post-Merger Integration Conference in Singapore, and then 2 events being hosted by one of our wonderful faculty, Professor Damodaran. Finally, if you need to get in touch with us, we are on LinkedIn. We've got our website, and we've got a whole bunch of people in different parts of the world. Marco takes care of everything GCC, Nicole US, Stefan Europe, and Erin is based in Singapore. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.